From my point of view.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Animals Against Earth and the Question of Planetarity by our instructor, Carl Olsson. The seminar will investigate anti-planetary action across different temporal scales and levels of organization, from the slow ascent of tetrapods onto land to gymnast philosophical hatred for the Earth. Through our example, we will extend the history of geological knowledge and assess our own participation in life's negation of Earth. In the end, we proceed to examine what a true elimination of everything terrestrial from ourselves might mean, a task far more difficult than a mere escape from the pull of Earth's gravity. Carl Olsson is a writer and a theorist working with histories and philosophies of science and spatial theory. His work touches on the human self-image, different concepts of freedom in nature, and transcendental philosophy. Carl recently completed a PhD in human geography at Newcastle University. He contributed to the second cycle of the terraforming at Strelka Institute and has been a visiting scholar at Waseda University. He has written for Urbanomic, Some Journal, and different geography journals and edited volumes. Over to you, Carl.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for showing up to the seminar. I'm basically going to start with a little bit of an introduction, and we'll see how long that takes. And then we'll proceed to some other things and a chance for everyone to introduce yourselves. But yeah, the idea is to start off by jumping right into it, and then we can kind of come back because I would really like to hear from you and sort of what your backgrounds are and sort of how you ended up in both at the New Center and also in this seminar. And of course, feel free to at any moment kind of interrupt me and ask any questions. I will try to kind of come back to make some time for asking questions during the thing, but if there's anything that seems weird or I'm not making sense, please tell me, because then we'll deal with it immediately. So essentially, the title of the seminar is Animals Against Earth, and also the question of planetarity. And essentially, our goal is to figure out what in the world this might mean. And today we're going to sort of just go through a little bit of background to set up a conceptual framework that maybe can help us proceed throughout the seminar to almost like water would flow from a spring. So we're going to set up some almost axiomatic things that will let us hopefully make sense of the way that life, and particularly the animal kingdom, has been able to kind of gradually move further away from our planet's center of gravity, and sort of what are the issues and problems and also philosophical implications involved in this process of gradual ascent. So I'm going to start with a bit of introduction, and then I'm going to go through the sort of the philosophical stakes, which I've quite recently been thinking about, the sort of the notion of ascent, and maybe in the later Platonic tradition, and the sort of the analogies and allegories that Plato uses and then other people take over as kind of a background, but see that this is something that happens in the middle of a much greater biological story. And then we're going to jump into some discussion about the readings we had for today. So first, really, what do we mean by planetarity, and what is a planet? Drawing on the text by Nigel and Bronislaw Szerszynski, which I think is a both recent and quite good introduction to some of the stakes of the planetary and contemporary social science and the social theory. And after that, we're gonna be using the text by, or the introduction to Mach's history of mechanics, to think about the relationship as a means to think about the relationship between the animal body and the mechanical laws of nature. And we're gonna mostly be speaking from a Newtonian perspective, by the way, just to kind of keep our narrative lens in mind. And after that, I'm going to try to kind of synthesize things a bit and set us up for essentially what's to come in the next 3 sessions. And after that, I would like us to take a small break. I'm not sure how long this first part is going to take, to be honest. We'll find out, I suppose. And then there will be time for some questions if you had time to think. And then I would like to go as to everyone to have a chance to introduce themselves, and so that we can sort of get to know each other a little bit and sort of see if we have any experience of what we will call anti-planetary practices or thinking about these things. And then sort of, if there is time, I will read a small text that I'm trying to work on to give some background, and probably I won't have time, but we'll see. And then we will prepare a tiny bit for the next session. So without further ado, kind of the learning aims that are written in the syllabus, that what do we want to get from this, is that kind of we want to learn about some key concepts related to anti-planetary actions and kind of transformations in life's history of moving further away from the center of Earth's gravity, which is what we will essentially be talking about. And we will be telling different philosophical stories, or learning about how to tell philosophical stories that are made by forcing a scale or kind of different scale constructs and jumping between different scales. So even if you are someone who might be just kind of not primarily interested in the planet, maybe there will be some kind of methodological lesson that we can take from this seminar in terms of how we can build philosophical narratives that unfold by mixing different temporal and spatial scales. And I think I will try to sort of keep this methodological lens in mind at all times, but it also is a little bit open how much we go into this side of things. But I think it's important to keep in mind that there's also something about how we tell this narrative that probably generalizes to other things. And then finally, I kind of want to talk on a similar note, what it means really to search for, if you will, transdisciplinary patterns in nature, or sort of similarities that are not always divided according to the human sciences, or sort of things that belong both in maybe physics and chemistry, and sort of the fact that there's not really a science of four-legged creatures in general, and things like that, certain patterns that recur but aren't fully exhausted by any kind of known study. So to be more precise then, in this kind of loop of trying to explain what we're doing, we want to raise some kind of consciousness of planetarity, and tracing a kind of a deep history and situating a number of relevant human and sort of animal practices in relation to the planet and what the planet is at heart. So we will be using various biological facts and also physical facts to define and sort of interpret planetarity as what might be a geographical concepts, which means that we will be drawing on biology to think about living beings in their interaction with the environment. So we are thinking about life in relation to something that is not life, rather than life on its own terms. There's a lot of work talking about ecological, about ecology as kind of life-on-life interaction in a very broad sense. This is mostly not what we will be doing, but we will precisely be thinking about life in relation to that which is not living, or sort of not primarily alive. And I think this opens up a different dimension of a lot of recent work on planets and the Anthropocene and deep time and geological concepts in general. So the goal of this is then to, and I mean this very literally, to understand life's ascent away from what we think of as down, as a project of anti-planetary philosophy. And I mean that the ascent as such is intrinsically philosophical, under some definition that we're going to try to articulate. So that by sort of ascending away from the Earth, we are sort of already 400 million years ago, 300 million years ago, when animals begin, or sort of our own ancestors at least, begin populating life on land rather than only in the seas, there is some kind of philosophy performed. And then later discourses, when sort of philosophers, as we traditionally know them, with beards and walking around in Athens, they're kind of arriving at something that has been ongoing for a very, very long time. And to do this, we're going to try to force and kind of lock a couple of scales together. So essentially, we're interested in the relationship between the animal's body and the planet. And through this, so these are the two kind of variables that we're always going to kind of keep in mind in this narrative and use it as kind of a frame. This is the intention of this gray thing here. It's a kind of a frame for that locks the scale so that we can look at different things within it to explore the different topics that we will be talking about, the biological concepts and so on. And what we will leave kind of unlocked in this is time, so that we will be kind of traversing a number of different scales, of temporal scales, in relation to this motion away from the planet, which we can. I mean, I've just been taking this kind of for granted up until this point, but we know that sort of animals have begun kind of, or animal life began in the oceans and then managed to make it their way onto land, and then of course, some have even managed to populate the air to a considerable degree throughout their lives. And now, less than a century ago, we've even managed to kind of, in some sense, leave the atmosphere. So there seems to be some kind of ascent of both life in general, but also animal life away from the center of the Earth, or the Earth's center of gravity. And this is what we're thinking about, yeah. It's probably important to mention. And in any case, we'll be looking at this through a variety of different timescales, all the way from single actions, like literally jumping, to, which is a sort of tragic practice, as we will find out, to single lifetimes, to ecological scales, which have to do the period over which a forest or something might persist through any ecosystem, to microevolutionary scales, where at the times in which a single species might undergo some changes, which might be tens of thousands of years, all the way to macroevolutionary timescales that for large creatures that have quite long durations between each generation may stretch, I mean, all the way up to hundreds of millions of years, and sort of think about patterns in animal evolution that go extremely that extend to very long times. So this is some of the things that we will kind of be aiming to. So we'll be traversing all of these different temporal scales when we interrogate the relationship between the individual animal body and Earth. And in this, we're going to try to level the field in a way and say that technology is just a continuation of biology, so that everything that we kind of do is kind of pertains to the same things. That sort of, so if I use a rocket to launch into space, it's kind of in some sense similar to me standing on the floor and jumping. But biology is also technical from the other point of view, that the rocket that goes into space is, of course, something that has been, or rather the sort of me jumping is, of course, subject to the same kind of mechanical constraints in some way that are necessary for like a crane to lift a big load up into the air. Nature is kind of unified. So everything has effects in the same space, or sort of moving bodies. So spaceflight, weightlifting, and tiktaalik, which is a transitional kind of lobe-finned fish that we'll be reading about for next week, kind of belong to the same thing. And perhaps even thought, in a way, belongs to the same thing. That it has that thinking and sort of deliberate cognition has effects that can be mapped into the way that life manages to move itself away from Earth. So we're going to be looking primarily at the kind of a vertical dimension rather than any kind of horizontal movements of life. So just some everyday observations. This kind of entire project started from me going to the gym and coming from my sort of studies in geography. And it's really weird the things that people do to move their bodies, and it's sort of I'm not sure if you've ever had this experience, but it's incredible. I find it incredibly strange that we have all of these kind of machines and contraptions that are kind of built to move to kind of mimic, and almost like a weird exoskeleton that mimics how the human body moves. And then I started reading in a lot of literature about kind of training literature. If you go to like a weightlifting manual or something like this, there is always the assumption of working against gravity. But that no one ever really thinks about the implications of this. Of course, gravity is a kind of a universal law, but no one really thinks about what kind of gravity is it that we're acting against. But obviously it is the Earth itself. But very rarely do we see any discussion about these kind of the potential philosophical implications of this. And the point of talking about something that is anti-planetary is to say that instead of perhaps working against gravity, really what we're doing when we say this, where someone like a gymnast performs a gravity-defying move, in fact, they are performing a kind of a planet-defying move in some sense. And so we're interested in this kind of vertical dimension of kind of expansion of thinking. And from this point of view, we can kind of actually let me pause here for a second and say and just check: do things make sense so far? I can nod or you can intervene. Okay. Good. So with this, I would kind of like, okay, Niamh, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. Hi, Carl. Just a quick question about I'm just fresh out of the seminar class with Reza yesterday. So I'm sure you're aware he's doing the diagonal and looking at the horizontal and the vertical sort of axis. So I guess I'm kind of alighting on the term vertical, and that you're saying that actually that's what we're sort of mining into is the vertical, and I guess because you're using the terminology of ascent as well. I'm just wondering if you can say a little bit more about the vertical. I mean, I do have not a really formed question yet, but it's about centripetal and centrifugal force, because that also came up in our class yesterday. So it's really interesting, and I've done a little bit of work myself on those kind of theory of forces, but I'm just kind of initially just kind of wondering if you can say a little bit more about the vertical, and why the vertical and not in relation to the horizontal, or are there implications of the horizontal as well, that it is a kind of an axis.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's very interesting in kind of the in a planetary context, we're going to kind of come to this later, but I'm going to sort of try to answer your question before I continue, is that the horizontal is not really it's not really a straight line. It's defined against the kind of the outer rim of the planet in some sense. It's always there's the center of the planet's center of gravity is in some sense what defines the horizontal and the vertical, right? And simply we can kind of decompose different movements here. So if we're using this kind of fixed reference point of the planet, the vertical becomes simply anything that kind of goes straight against the force of gravity such that it kind of operates primarily, of course, on us here on Earth. Our lives are, of course, really dominated by Earth's gravity in both the kind of what we will call later kind of proximal and kind of distal senses. That both are like literally my movements are kind of. It's very different if I move on the moon, for instance, or if I'm on a spaceship far away from Earth. But also the way that sort of just the Earth happens to kind of be packed, and that the planet is really kind of sorted in a density gradient with a few kind of clear transitions, is something that is very. There's a very particular kind of organization of matter that. Not only kind of conditions life, that sort of it has to be perhaps organized in a certain way for life to be able to both emerge potentially, we don't know, but also to be able to spread. But also there are some very strong constraints, as we will find out, that life maybe looks the way it does, or sort of in many ways, even at a microscopic level, precisely because of the way that the planet is organized. And they're due to various, so there are symmetries and so on that end up being very kind of adaptable, that are able to kind of populate different regions of the planet. And so there will be a kind of an astrobiological component to all of this too. But essentially, even the idea of having something that is vertical. Sorry, I'm going to say this wrong 1,000 times, I feel. But even to have something that is vertical and have a vertical axis, kind of course, implies that you have some kind of center that you're defining it against. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I guess actually that has, and that's what we're going to be getting into, that, it has a whole sort of, philosophical, premise based on sort of origin and departure from origin, I guess, if we're talking about the center in a very much centripetal, force dominant way in relation to Newton, and his kind of, third law of motion. So that there's a kind of a whole struggle, or of life in terms of sort of resisting being pulled back, and that's about the strength and the kind of the nature of embodiment, I guess, to try to resist that being pulled back. So that's what the kind of frame that we're kind of looking at with all of the kind of philosophical sort of implications of centering, and then maybe decentering, as philosophical sort of readings of antiquity will kind of take it in that that trajectory, in that way.
Yeah, but essentially, this is kind of what we're moving through in a way, right? So if I continue on a little bit here and go through sort of this revisiting the Socratic tradition, I think hopefully some of this will come together, and then feel free to let me know if it doesn't.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. So I mean, there's a very interesting kind of division after Socrates in our philosophical tradition that happens kind of immediately. On the one hand, there is Plato, who has this very kind of metaphysical theory of where metaphors around ascent kind of occur quite often. There is both, I mean, both in the analogy of the sun and sort of the divided line, there's a kind of an ascent away from the terrestrial and sensible world towards the intelligible realm. And then when it gets to the allegory of the cave, there's kind of the same thing going on. Like, literally, it's about leaving the cave and going up onto the surface. So there is this sort of very, of course, pictorial language of ascent, but that it also makes its way into the kind of the content of philosophical discourse very kind of immediately in Plato. And this is perhaps very, very clear later on in the Platonic tradition with people like Plotinus, who will talk about really kind of ascending towards away from the intelligible world and the sensible world, and kind of try to achieve some kind of unification with the one or the good. That becomes, sorry, I was reading chat, that becomes very kind of central, and this is then sort of taken over and becomes points of inspiration also in Christian philosophy and thinking. But on the other hand, there is a sort of a different kind of tendency in kind of responding to Socrates. And I'm going to walk through this quickly because we're going to be talking about this more in the final session of the seminar, but I kind of want to just foreground this a little bit. Where for Plato, sort of virtue and kind of reaching enlightenment, if you will, seems to be about, it's something that you achieve and then you have it. The mind is sort of the very point of kind of basically the mind, the mind or the soul is modeled on vision. You see it and then you have it. Whereas for Antisthenes and Xenophon, who are also kind of pupils of Socrates or kind of followers, they seem to think that the mind is much more like a bodily organ. It requires practice and kind of you need to kind of really hone it in a way that almost is, I think some would argue, is sort of modeled on gymnastic training, and gymnastics then in the kind of the Greek sense of sort of being in the kind of the arena and practicing wrestling and whatnot, and sort of the mind already that will kind of give us some kind of virtue. It has to be practiced. In Xenophon, this is kind of quite strong in the sense that he even thinks that virtue can be lost, which is something that I don't think Plato would really kind of entertain in the same way. And then with Antisthenes, who becomes sort of the, in a way, the teacher of a figure like Diogenes, who the cynic, who is really kind of being, you know, called Socrates gone mad in a way, and who would live in a barrel and really pursue some sort of minimalism. And these are individual thinkers who think about virtue in a way in the highest form as kind of autarky or freedom from unnecessary wants, and kind of want to get rid of any unnecessary pleasures and so on, and just be able to take care of as much of themselves as they possibly can, and find some kind of freedom in basically a sort of a self-government. And this then becomes part, in a way, a part of the Stoic tradition a bit later. But we're interested here primarily in this split. And I think, so on the one hand, there is the more kind of metaphysical tradition, and then there is a more practice-oriented legacy of Socrates in the Greek philosophy. And I wonder if perhaps something of what we're doing here becomes a new kind of Socratic synthesis between these two tendencies. So we're both interested in perhaps a question of assent, but from a very practice-oriented perspective, where really it has to do with honing the body as a way not only of honing the mind, but also as a physical way of kind of performing something of philosophical value. And some kind of, or at least we can think of it as such. Whether or not we have to agree with this perspective is a whole different matter. I think I will be saying a lot of things that are very, that we probably should disagree with, but nevertheless we have to, in kind of approaching it, we have to take at least the unconscious philosophy, or the sort of the implied philosophical tendencies of certain commitments very seriously in order to either dismiss them or to at least evaluate them. So I basically we're interested in here in the kind of the different factors that constrain assent, right? What are the things that we can that we have to consider if there is to be anything like a upwards movement, either of the soul or of the body? What I think is really kind of one of the key points here is that sort of, okay, if there is such a kind of an idea of ascent and moving upwards that both occurs in an allegorical sense quite early in philosophy, but also has some sort of real geophysical basis, because of course the way that an analogy or allegory gets weight is by really comparing it to something in real. Otherwise, it just there's no point. This is all an ongoing story that we know now from having much better knowledge about natural history and so on than we did 2,500 years ago. So in a way, the sort of the philosophical discourse on ascent is kind of begins as a kind of a conceptual twist on a story that is, that is already kind of underway in a very strong sense. And to understand that, the sense in which there is a kind of an ongoing process of ascent, that is why we should perhaps turn to think about planetarity, so that overcoming the sensible world can, in a sense, become overcoming the planet. So what is planetarity? So quite recently, and here I'm gonna shift perspective a little bit. Perhaps in the last decade and so on, once sort of in the social sciences and social theory, once discourse about the Anthropocene and turn towards deep time and geology in a way had kind of matured a little bit, there began to be more interest into thinking about planets as such. Here's a quote from Valerie Olsson and Lisa Messeri, who are, I think they're both human geographers of some denomination. While the Anthropocene can be praised for knitting back together human and natural worlds, this separation is not entirely erased, but rather displaced to spaces deeper and further beyond Earth's surface. What is the broad environmental or deep ecological in these terms? Presumably then the human and the natural, or perhaps the deeper and further beyond. So, and this is from 2015, 10 years ago. And I think it's important that we keep in mind that sort of to situate what we're doing here also in a way in relation to an ongoing discourse in theory, where the planetary scale, or sort of the planet in some sense, is becoming quite an important thing. Perhaps it's even now kind of past its prime, and sort of people are not talking about it so much anymore. And there are many things that the planetary has meant over the past number of years, but often it's treated as sort of some kind of alternative to the global, for instance, where it is a bit more geophysical and a bit more bit less neoliberal, I suppose. But I think that quite more recently, there has been a shift towards thinking about the planetary in very kind of astrophysical terms. That is quite interesting, because they do something different that, in a way, not only decenter the human, but also decenter ecology altogether. It becomes a kind of more of a physical than a biological lens on planetarity. And I think this is quite productive also because it allows a comparison between different kinds of planets and so on. And the Clark and Szerszynski article that we read is sort of, I would say, really kind of trying to kind of grapple with this and kind of push this perspective. So the term planetarity originally comes from Gayatri Spivak in a text, Death of a Discipline, I think it's called, where she describes planetarity as a kind of alterity, or kind of primordial alterity that cannot fully be overcome. It's kind of an inaccessible ground of otherness. And ironically, she kind of says, I cannot offer a formulaic access to planetarity. No one can. But of course, this has not really stopped anyone from trying to think about the planet in its otherness. If nothing else, I suppose this has been a call to try to do just that. as things often go. And I think, I mean, there is quite a bit on this notion. I'm just going to move straight to how we're going to, or at least how I'm going to be talking about it here, in order to kind of minimize the risk of confusion, which I feel is already quite high. And so basically recent theoretical work is kind of offering a planet-first approach. So these are basically attempts to interpret various phenomena as planetary phenomena, planets that do things. So there's both the work that we read by Clark and Szerszynski, and then Lukáš Likavčan has been doing he's been doing great work about sort of also trying to think about planets first as sort of planets in a more, how to put it, astrophysical perspective, I suppose, where there's also discussions with people, astronomers and so on, that are, and it's a way of kind of really trying to centering the planetary and use that as a basis for thinking about various phenomena. So to zooming out from Earth, we're no longer simply trying to get rid of anthropocentrism. We're even kind of pushing to get rid of some kind of terracentrism, which is an interesting move, because this allows us to kind of look back to the Earth and kind of compare it in some kind of against something different, and against different planets and different phenomena that are of a very kind of the same scale as a planet, but are not planets. So if planets do things that, I mean, it kind of raises the question, what really is a planet? Kind of most obviously, a planet is, I don't know, I should have put it here, but there's this, I will try to find it in the break. There's this XQCD meme where it kind of, there's this a billion attempts to try to define planets, and it's very difficult. But most obviously, in any case, planets hold together, and the medium of their coherence is gravity. A planet is a roughly spherical shape that is of elements that is held together. So it really is kind of an organization of matter, that a mass that's held together as a mass that acts on itself. And this is basically what I will mean by constitutive planetarity, or planetarity as such here. So when I talk about planetarity throughout the seminar, this is what I have in mind. The planetarity of a planet is basically its organization and the consequences of that organization. It is, and there are certain things that follow from this. There is this kind of almost like a density gradient, and there are probably a planet, at least in the planets that are relevant for us, will kind of orbit a sun. And there are many kind of consequent or kind of incidental, but also kind of essential factors that make a planet that planet. For instance, what kind of elements is it organized from? But my point is that despite any kind of like, what is its placement? What is this? What is that? And what are its specific historical narratives? A planet wouldn't be a planet if it wasn't organized as a mass. You could take the same number of atoms that the Earth is made of and kind of disperse them throughout the universe, and it wouldn't be the planet. But precisely by packing them together, you have a planet. So it's a kind of an organizational concept, and an entity that exists through a kind of a self-organization. Even if the same way planets may have magnetic fields, and have heat engines, and so on and so forth. Yes. And what is interesting for us in particular is that planetary space ends up being kind of structured. It's a very particular kind of organization, right? We might even say that Earth is a kind of a transcendental space machine. It produces, it seems, creatures, or if it produces life, that have very specific relationships to their surrounding space, and this is a major topic that we're going to talk about, not every kind of organization is going to, on a planet, is going to be kind of acceptable or sort of workable or functional. And there is a big question whether or not this is, to what degree contingency is active in evolution, and to what extent there's some kind of determinism. And in relation to this, we are probably going to be quite strong determinists in this seminar, and simply say that sort of probably every form of life that emerges on an Earth-like planet is probably going to look quite similar. And we're going to be talking a little bit about why. All of these sort of the relational properties of the planet, its placement in the solar system, and sort of the strength of its magnetic field and so on, will of course have implications for any life that kind of emerges on it. Same thing with its weather conditions and so forth. This is something that we will kind of have to deal with a little bit. But when I previously said that we're going to try to isolate the individual animal body in relation to the planet, what I really mean is that we're trying to think about it in relation to gravity, right? And to the sort of the force which makes the planet a planet. I think it's Clark and Szerszynski that puts it very nicely, that planets are places. Our primary interest and a place is in the tradition of geographical thought is different from a space, where space is kind of just anything and empty. A place is sort of a space that matters. Planets are local downs. It's possible to have an organization, and here we come back to what you were talking about, Niv. It's possible to have a kind of an organization between up and down in relationship to some kind of center. And this is just what the planet is. It's an organization of matter into a center. That makes it possible to even talk about an up and a down. So planets are places. And our primary interest is basically, or maybe not primary, I'm going to scratch that, but one of the things that we're interested in is in how life as living beings determines places to be planets. So this is what I mean, and this is what the philosophical life achieves. It questions the terrestrial. So if a place is any kind of structured space, a space with meaning, we are interested also in how do we extract the planetary from a place. This sounds a bit strange, but what I really mean is sort of how do we identify in our environment the factors that are genuinely planetary? How do we find out in all of the things that kind of constrain our movements in space, which ones are due directly and indirectly to the place that we're in being on a planet? How did we, or our far-off ancestors, discover that we live on a planet? And this is not really a matter of saying like, oh, look, there is a floating body in the sky, we're probably on one of them too. This is not really the point at all. What I mean is precisely how did we even kind of discover, in a very practical sense, the things about the world that constrain us, that we can later find out kind of theoretically is due to our immediate surroundings being organized in planetary form. So there is some kind of epistemic dimension to what we're going to be talking about. And this is going to come back in the third session in particular, that sort of we also seem to be interrogating our environment as a kind of planetary thing, and sort of it's almost like a collective project where life takes on different forms that has to relate themselves to kind of in relation to its backdrop. And probably there's no other thing for life that is as universal or sort of as general so far than having to relate itself to a planet. This sounds a bit strange too, but I mean, imagine if you're a small animal, and sort of in some place maybe you will live your entire life in darkness, and there will be this and that constraint, and in another place there will be sun, and there's that a number of constraints that kind of come from that. But no matter where you are on the planet, you're going to kind of have to deal with certain things that come from the fact of the matter in your surrounding being organized as a planet. So there's a kind of, in the history of life, there is no time where we haven't had to deal with the fact that sort of Earth's mass acting on us, even though it has been kind of buffered and kind of bulwarked against through various forces like lift and so on, and buoyancy in water and so on. But nevertheless, so yeah, planetary space is structured. There's a kind of a gradient in some way. Same thing with in the atmosphere, there is a gradient of various gases that are organized, which means that literally, if life is going to kind of move vertically in relationship to its origin points, whether that is from sort of underwater volcanic vents or sort of in shallow pools, it's going to have to adapt to a variety of different environments that are simply radically different in terms of the forces that will act on the body. And here is one of the quotes from Clark and Szerszynski. Yeah? We should take seriously the suggestion that planetary surfaces like ours that are directly exposed to ultraviolet solar radiation may be unusual places for ecosystems to emerge and survive, and that most life in the galaxy might live in subsurface oceans within planetary interiors. So that life ascends or ends up ascending onto the surface of a planet is itself not a kind of a foregone conclusion. It's not something that necessarily happens. It requires a great deal of kind of good fortune, but also, and it requires just in terms of both evolution, but also in terms of how the planet itself has been structured. And if ascent is sort of a topic of philosophy, there is a great deal of luck involved in philosophy. So we want to isolate the specific ascent of terrestrial life in light of a planetary, which is to say a gravitational perspective. And the rest then is history, the way that we have been able to, as living beings, traverse the environment that has been given to us. And at the same time, we must not forget kind of how unusual this story might be, but we must also kind of remember why it might be unusual. Sort of how did the Earth in particular make us? And I'm going to pause here again for a second and see if there are any questions that anyone might have. And then I'm going to continue for a little bit more. Please, Carlos.
Hi, yeah, I was just curious about when you were referring to the planetary in relation to neoliberalism, sorry. And I was just thinking if it was more in economical. I mean, I was just curious about this analogy between the two.
Yeah, I guess this is an argument that let me come back to this with you with the proper references. But the argument is basically that planetary is kind of an alternative scale construct or an alternative discourse to globalization, which is obviously a concept that is both tied into a very particular kind of thinking about the surface of the Earth, into an organization, into nation states, and then but also then becomes trade flows and so on, there's the very narrative of globalization kind of takes for granted or sort of presents a model of the Earth as this kind of smooth space that we can interact on and so on. So the planetary, in contrast, is trying to perhaps present in some literature at least, is trying to present a more grounded sort of narrative about the planet that doesn't take this into account and sort of incorporate also more geophysical and geological kind of perspectives into thinking about the Earth.
Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, so yeah, Pradeep, sorry.
Hi, Carl. Was just curious about two aspects that you mentioned of defining planets. Let's say I was it seemed to be a little broad definition, and I was curious why we would go for such a broad definition of planets, which are self-organizing systems and gravity exerting on itself. I seem to draw a parallel between intermolecular forces that may very well be characterized, but on a totally different scale, but having the same, let's say, particulars, attributes that could define them as well. Yeah, I think I'm just more curious about that, the kind of definition we choose to sort of move ahead with. I mean, deliberately I still don't know how to account for planet as places in this definition. I mean, that is another attribute that you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, I think thanks for that, first of all. I think defining a planet is something that is quite nebulous in general, because it's very difficult to find something that kind of fits with our intuition of what a planet is and should be, in the sense that just the controversy around Pluto losing its planet status and so on, the sort of the massive popular outrage of this event. It's just very difficult to come up with something that kind of captures what we take a planet to be and sort of gets everything right. The reason I want to talk about gravity is basically, ultimately the reason is that I think talking about planetarity here ends up being quite something that captures what I want to say quite well. It ends up being almost like a catchy thing to say, quite honestly, in the sense that if we're interested in sort of how the gravitational aspects of living on this planet has kind of influenced life and sort of and become something that we are really literally kind of struggling with every day, this becomes a way of kind of articulating that. There are, of course, this is of course some sort of philosophical or reduction, right, in the sense that I'm only interested in a very particular aspect of what it means to live on the planet. And this is a great wager, of course. If we're trying to explain the history of life, of course, we have to literally explain everything, and we cannot do that. So this is why I think this is what I kind of achieved by fixing the scales in a way and trying to find at least, if not a complete explanation, which seems to be a very hopeless ambition, to find at least a philosophically interesting narrative about life on a planet that also kind of something that pertains to all of us in virtue of where we are. And I think this is why I go for this vague, it's not really even a definition, I would say, but more like a sense of planetary, because I think you understand what I'm meaning, right? That sort of if you take the same matter that the Earth is made of and kind of distribute it in a different organization, of course, there's not really any planet there. But yeah.
Yeah, but I think I'm still trying to figure, I mean, if I could ask a follow-up on the same question. I'm still trying to account for the difference between scales that we are tackling over here.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to somehow be incorporated, which I'm unable to do myself, at least for of what that would mean, the difference between scales, or at least when we draw these two parallels. Of course, there would be many levels between the scales as well, and we are sort of making jumps between two scales, let's say. I mean, for example, one of the scales could very well be, I don't know if city could be a scale difference in that terms, or nation state could be a difference of scale. Planet seems to be of a different kind, but also of a different scale altogether. And how we are sort of not accounting for that, and that seems to like disturb me following the trajectory of thought.
I find this super interesting because to me it's sort of, because I think on the one hand I think you're absolutely right. There is something very strange about this, but also I think that it's quite right that basically when I'm kind of lifting my pen, I'm doing a particular like mechanical work against gravity. And what's involved in this is literally me lifting the pen by sort of my muscles contracting and so on, and the pen kind of and the work being done, and the sort of the opposite force and sort of planet reacting against that. And so really it is two bodies that are kind of moving, that are just moving, and two kind of opposed forces. An action and a reaction, so I don't think it's, and this is literally all that I mean. That sort of the way that we move against a kind of a gravitational force, which is we're moving inside of an object essentially.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, of course, in some sense, we're also part of the planet. I think this is another narrative that we're going to come back to. We're not really we're kind of an intraplanetary flow in a sense, because we haven't really left the planet in neither materially nor kind of in terms of its gravitational influence, right? We're really inside the planet, inside of a gas cloud. So if that makes sense, I'm going to move on to briefly talk about the mechanical experience science distinction that Mach makes, and then I'm going to try to wrap up a little bit so that we can take a small break. And this is hopefully a bit less confused than the previous part may have been. But basically, Mach was an Austrian philosopher and physicist, sort of an arch-empiricist. He wrote this quite canonized, almost, history of mechanics. Fortunately for me, or for us, one of the most interesting things about it happens in the introduction, and which makes it a little bit easier to deal with. And basically, he distinguishes between mechanical science as the study of mechanics, but also kind of something that begins a bit earlier, or much earlier, mechanical experiences, which are basically in some sort of intuitive, I guess we would call it know-how nowadays, about how the world works. The fact that sort of we can come up with the idea of utilizing levers, and we can come up with the wheels to kind of minimize friction and so on, or and we can sort of put like a giant stone on some logs and roll it to make things a bit easier for ourselves if we want to build a pyramid. And this is a very fascinating distinction because it kind of supposes that there is obviously a prehistory of mechanical know-how before that we have experienced and continue to experience in everyday life without having any kind of formalized theory about how the world works. And then there's the fact that we got mechanics wrong for quite a long time, even though we managed to kind of have approximations that were more or less workable. And then mechanical science is basically Archimedes to Einstein and beyond. And this is maybe what we're a little bit less interested in. So what's interesting here is that kind of when Mach mentions or kind of introduces mechanical experiences or this know-how, he kind of neglects what should be very, very obvious, which is that sort of our musculoskeletal system is just a group of levers itself. That whenever, and this is the most intimate knowledge we have of mechanics at all, in the sense that sort of if I continue using this pen as an example, this is really kind of me, me kind of doing mechanical things and sort of utilizing my muscles contracting in order to kind of exert a force on on another bone and so on. There's a kind of, we're a system of levers basically. So clearly, this kind of know-how of how the world works must go much, much deeper and much, much further back than he kind of intimates. Even if we kind of manage to come up with a know-how of how we can manipulate things externally to ourselves, this is kind of built upon our ability to kind of understand how we can interact with our bodies as tools in the world. And this is what I mean when there is a kind of a fungibility between the technical and the biological. We're all in kind of acting within the same kind of action space in a way. And of course, there's a distinction to be made here that sort of this tacit know-how we have through our own bodies, like literally as bodies that are moving in space, is of course the kind of a field that can be studied in science too, as kind of in biomechanics, where we understand sort of how our system of levers and sort of and joints kind of works from a more kind of theoretical perspective, so that we can build on top of what is already there a kind of an understanding that we can also use to kind of almost bootstrap our ability. The sort of, you know, sports science is quite interesting from this perspective that, you know, there are, again, if we go back to like a weightlifting manual and so on, there's a lot of emphasis on sort of lifting the barbell on kind of a straight path and so on, that we realize that sort of due to how our bodies are constructed, we have certain privileged way of moving that are more efficient than others to kind of conserve energy and so on. And it even turns out, of course, that our bodies are very good at calibrating what's kind of efficient movement patterns and so on by through both kind of our kind of biological sensors, but also in terms of how evolution has kind of really physically crafted our bodies and kind of joint insertion or tendon insertion points and so on. So we're going to be trying to expand the sort of distinction of Mach into this more biomechanical direction, and keeping in mind the dual perspectives of what the body does and its know-how, its intrinsic know-how of the world, which also kind of interrogates the planetary, right? And also keep in mind our explicit knowledge about these things and sort of how we can sort of intervene and think about it. So just some components of all of this is sort of, you know, there's kinetics, which is how different forces move on mechanical systems, and then kinematics, which is almost like a geometry of movement, sort of how far my joints can move and so on but disregarding force. And then of course we will be talking about gravity as kind of the principal and constitutive medium of planetarity as really sort of the force that is exerted upon us at all times, varyingly so. And then there are other sort of spatial constraints that are quite interesting to think about, sort of the square cube law, where sort of if you how the volume of a cube kind of just increases much faster than the area of a square, and how this has different implications for how big animals can end up being because of density of muscle fibers and sort of how strong bones can get and so on. So there are various sort of constraints that come with just space and the sort of the materials that are involved in biological systems, especially under Earth's gravity, that sort of evolution has been able to extremely well kind of calibrate itself towards building. And the sort of the tissue mass is kind of force output scaling, that sort of if you get too big, like you don't really see an elephant jump, but on the other hand, we don't really jump in proportionally as high as a little grasshopper or something. And then the sort of the various integrity of biological systems, the sort of how are we able to kind of literally hold together in order to be able to kind of prepare us to move around and to find out and understand our environment. So thinking about ourselves in planetary terms is first of all to think about ourselves in some kind of biomechanical terms. But also we should keep in mind at all times that kind of mechanics are weird on Earth, that we're dealing with a special case, right? That things, if you go off the planet, or if you go to the moon, or stay on the International Space Station even, things are kind of not the same as here. There's this kind of funny cup they made to be able to drink in space, because different masses simply don't interact as they do in the special case of kind of the terrestrial world. And I think what we have to keep in mind in all of this is that that the planet is the really weird case. For most of space, and I mean space both in the sense of extension and sort of space as in space, the place of the stars, is just kind of empty, and the kind of aggregations of matter are in a sense kind of weird special cases, and each of them ends up being quite unique in particular. And then sort of when we're talking about biomechanics here, we have to also think about perhaps make a distinction between proximal and distal effects of planetarity on our bodies, where proximal is something that's close and distal is something that is further away, right? So the proximal effects would be kind of directly impacting movements of the body, and such as, if just the way that sort of I have to exert force against gravity when I'm raising my arm. Distal effects of gravity would sort of have to do more with sort of how the environment is held together, how the Earth, the different striations of the Earth and the gradients are sorted. So, for instance, the kind of some tree branches breaking under the weight of too many apples, as they did outside of here a few weeks ago, is a kind of a proximal effect of gravity, whereas kind of the soil being packed in the ground is a more distal kind of effect in relation to the apple tree, and we're going to sort of see how variously proximal and distal forces are kind of coming together in different ways as animals grow in size and mass, and as they navigate different kinds of environments throughout evolution. So here's an apple tree, and let's skip this. So with this, we can probably come up with some sort of initial synthesis that hopefully will set us up for our next few sessions. So we have kind of we're primed to kind of think a little bit about planetary life over different timescales. We have different lenses at our disposal here in a way. We have a kind of some sort of astrobiological comparison, in the sense that we're zooming out to think about the planet as a astrophysical entity, and whether or not things might be different on other heavenly bodies elsewhere in the universe, and sort of what might be similar. And we're also interested in thinking about history, and sort of in how kind of historical trends that continue to unfold on Earth figure in all of this, just in the sense that what kinds of life have spread to different environments, and to which environments? What do these life forms look like? Obviously, as animals who are not kind of primary producers in a way, like for instance plants, we're trailing plant life onto land, for instance. We're always kind of following along because we need some kind of nutrition that we kind of have to extract from other living beings. So there enters a kind of an ecological dimension into the spread of and the proliferation of planetary life. And then there are sort of, if there is something philosophical about ascent, there is perhaps also a more pessimistic line of lineage of living beings that have kind of seeped further into the Earth's crust and sort of flushed down with water and adapted to life very low, very far below us. And I kind of have given up on the entire thing of trying to escape the planet. And of course, few living beings have really tried to escape Earth or anything like this. But I think we can see that simply as a result of the sort of the spatial structure and organization of planetary life, there's a succession of environments that have to be kind of explored and inhabited by living beings. I mean, and there are certain constraints that have to, in terms of how the body looks like, and certain mechanical problems that have to be solved at each level. So the next time we'll be thinking about how different it is to actually be able to eat something in the water as opposed to eating something on land, which is something that I never really had thought about before. But it turns out that this is a massive problem for vertebrates to be able to live on land in the first place. That it's just really extremely difficult to be able to actually swallow something on land if you're coming from a background where basically you've been adapted to have to deal with hydrodynamic forces. So, and I mean, if there are anti-planetary tendencies, we will question sort of at what scales we do find them, what time scales are we talking about. So on one hand, as I said before, there is sort of the long time of macroevolution, but there is also like the more recent technological attempts to explore extraplanetary space. And in some way, we want to kind of place these together and hold them together to think about this. And if acting, I kind of didn't talk about this before, but so the Cynic philosophers sort of following Antisthenes and Diogenes would have this idea of acting according to nature, as opposed to the laws of the city-states, like physis against nomos. And if this is their kind of mantra and belief, we have to ask what tendency is most natural. So, for instance, is that which is most natural, that which kind of pertains to our bodies. We should perhaps not have to eat tasty food, because that's a kind of an unnecessary thing. They kind of a decadent cultural things, but it's not actually a bodily need. But then we could at least conceivably try to jump scales and think about, okay, but if life is on a kind of an ascending path over hundreds of millions of years, perhaps this is far more natural than anything that sort of pertains to me in my current lifetime. And we can sort of act according to things and to trends and tendencies of a completely different scale. And to give ourselves over to them as sort of a philosophical project. And in other words, is nature what is kind of given to me immediately in my lifetime, or is it sort of the trend that I partake in? And then, of course, there's a big question about, if someone took my previous seminar, there was a lot about biological autonomy and freedom. And there's an aspect of this here. There's a question of kind of optimizing mobility and sort of motility of the animal body for some sort of independence from its planetary backdrop, and sort of add the planetary as something that has to be accounted for when we move around in the environment. It's in this sense, it may not be so much other in Spivak's sense, but something that is opposite to certain aspirations of life. It's a force that always pulls us in a certain direction, and if we want to sort of go in a different direction, we have to do something. We have to actively do something in order to kind of to do something else. So in this way, it's a kind of a negative and positive constraint on animal morphology and freedom of movement. It's both something that really kind of enables us by animal life by sort of pulling together matter and sort of having kind of density gradients where the processes that lead to life becoming possible in the first place, but it's also a massive constraint in sort of what life can look like. So in a sense, maybe we can think that animals and other living beings are a bit like honeycomb in sort of, where bees attempt to make these like radial tubes, but they end up kind of hexagonal because they kind of push against each other. But in a kind of in the opposite way, that sort of there's the planet, and then the living beings that emerge on it and end up being successful kind of just end up looking in a certain way as a result of planetarity, with bilateral symmetry and radial symmetry, which seems to predominate in animals. And then there is the kind of the epistemic aspects of all of this. Let me just quickly check this. Yeah, and I'm just gonna go through this slide and one more, and then we're gonna move into a short break. But I want to mention also that there's the sort of the epistemic aspect here, that maybe the best way to kind of know a space or a place is to move around it according to one's means. And if planets are places, which is structured spaces, then maybe to some extent we know the planetary environment simply by moving it. We find out about what our planetary lot in life is by being able to kind of interrogate it by our movements. And this is in the same way that sort of I have some kind of tacit mechanical knowledge or know-how if I'm able to utilize a kind of an external lever to move a rock. Maybe I have some kind of knowledge of planetarity by being able to jump and to walk and to swim and so on. And we can make this even more radical in a way, and we're going to kind of push in this direction also, that maybe we can even say in some weird way that animals are concepts in a very physical sense, that we are forms brought into being by the planet in this honeycomb way, so that we almost express the planetary place through our very being as a sort of primordial type of thought that is not really ours, but is given and generated by the planet, as if a concept is kind of materialized, solidified little conceptual form. And in this sense, we might perhaps say that philosophy is lived through both evolution and anti-planetary movements that are opposite to the Earth's gravity. And it's very clear by looking at ourselves and other animals, at least, that some forms seem to be privileged platforms for exploring the environment. Right, bilateral symmetry, which kind of, so there's the bilaterian phylum, which we belongs to as well, which means that sort of animals that are macroscopically kind of bilateral and sort of mirror symmetrical account for about far over 90% of all extant species. And there might be some kind of strong reasons for this, because it's not in the sense that it maybe outcompetes other life, but simply that it's an extremely kind of adaptable and robust platform for different evolutionary kind of changes to take hold. So, for instance, we're very mechanically efficient, both at the bottom of the sea to be able to kind of crawl and have a mouth that sort of sucks things up from the mud and so on, but also for swimming, because it's possible compared to a radially symmetric animal, a bilaterian kind can exert kind of a downward pressure against gravity and kind of to control it where it swims in the water. On land, it's the same thing. We have access to kind of the tetrapod kind of form where we have like 4 legs and a tail to move and be able to kind of move around on walk on land in a way that is perhaps more difficult if you're literally a tube, for instance. And then the same thing in the air, where birds are able to kind of generate lift, and we might sort of think about a bunch of other kind of technical forms that have been made by human beings, such as trains and cars and planes, that end up also being kind of basically bilaterally symmetric. So there seems to be certain forms that are just more morphologically adapted to many of the different sort of very, very like radically different conditions that are present on a planet, or at least on this planet. And this is something that is, you know, to me, this is extremely interesting. That sort of maybe it is the case that sort of it also has some astrobiological implications potentially, right? That sort of probably an alien from a different planet that resembles Earth is likely going to look quite similar to us. Yes. And then finally, of course, we're going to kind of raise some kind of consciousness, and I think we've already begun a little bit about what all of this means for ourselves and how we think about ourselves and our history. So in the next next session, sorry, we will look at a couple of moments from our long anti-planetary history, focusing on the kind of the sea to land transition of our own ancestors and some of the problems involved there. And after that, we will be looking at the present, maybe in session 3, to think about how different practices in sports and engineering make explicit our kind of planetary situation and how we can kind of seize on that philosophically. And then finally in session 4, we will see if we can kind of, if we think that all of this is a long trajectory of philosophy, we can think a little bit about what ending philosophy and ending our relationship to the Earth might actually mean, other than simply going beyond it. Because, of course, even if we leave the Earth physically, we're still kind of historically impinged upon it, upon by the Earth, due to sort of its extreme relevance through the evolution of who we are. Yeah, any questions about that? Because so let's do it like this then. I'm gonna stop sharing this for a minute. Let's take a I think we have time for about 10 minutes break, and feel free to think if you have any questions or anything that seemed puzzling or particularly interesting. I'm also a little bit open to we can tailor a little bit how the seminar goes in relation to some of your concerns also. I would be open to that. But yeah, think a little bit, and then when we come back, let's talk for a minute, and then let's go through. I would like to hear a bit from all of you what your backgrounds are and who you are and how you ended up here. And then finally, I will talk a bit about what to do for next session. Does that sound okay? So if we reconvene at 37 past the hour?
Yes.
See you in a bit. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you managed to get some water or coffee or something. And also that you maybe had time to think about something that puzzled you or kind of moved you throughout the time I was talking. Please go ahead, Niamh.
Hi, yeah, Carl. It's really interesting tension, I think, that you're kind of raising here, and I'm just wondering. It's actually a little bit flipping back to your previous seminar, which I also really enjoyed, about a kind of question about the ontic and the epistemological. Where and Kant, Kant's sort of formulation that thinking of geography before history, and that the sense that actually that the planet must be there before us, that without us looking at it, that is the ontic. And then how we can say anything about that is the epistemological question. But then, of course, it's observer dependent. Well, we can say that kind of, retroactively later. So the conditions, but for Kant, of the possibility of that epistemological question then are about the categorical framework of concepts, and a whole paradigm of representation, and sort of that there must be some completeness of the conceptual and a totality, and if you like, that really kind of brings us into this idea of the planetary that exists before us and the ontic as an absolute space, as a kind of a container for things and bodies to move in it. So it's a movement then, in that sense, could be kind of understood against the ground of this sort of vertical access, that and an idea of ascent in the absolute space. But then, so I'm really kind of interested in then what I'm taking from what you're setting up here is that movement is inherently a reactive force in a very Newtonian sort of physics sense. Because it's against the backdrop of the constraint of gravity, where you're really saying it's isolating it as a centripetal force, which is the pull back to the center, and that this being the kind of, in a way, almost that center is like a primordial place, that we emerge out of, as as embodied bipedal endoskeletal mammals that were fighting against any movement then is in that struggle of being pulled back towards the center, and then movement understood as that resistance of being pulled back to the center, sets up a kind of a paradigm of a kind of a background that is kind of fixed, sort of frame of reference. And why I was talking about the centrifugal force, that the whole debate that centers around centripetal and centrifugal force that Huygens and picks up from from Leibniz in relation to Newton is where it actually is a new paradigm of space, that it's kind of talking about a real outward force, not a reactive one, and which Leibniz says is induced by the circulation of the body upon which the force acts. So the movement of the body is a kind of a curved path in space relative to other bodies. So you're already starting with a different idea, of space that's not absolute and as a kind of a container. And it kind of, you can see then the sort of trajectory, of where that goes to in terms of relativistic sort of physics, that what Leibniz is introducing there is that this primary inertial body, so the non-movement has a potential movement in it. So there's a latent sort of force. So it's actually not reactive. So I don't know. That's a really interesting, and I mean, I'm still kind of, thinking in motion with this myself, so I don't have the kind of answers there. But it's very much a different paradigm or question that with Newton. It's very much centripetal and centrifugal forces are active and reactive, and there's more about a conservation of energy. Again, we would say first law of thermodynamics as opposed to second law. There's a conservation of forces in the universe, and a kind of sense of equilibrium. So there's a whole kind of framework of relationship between forces there, and it's kind of nested around this idea of center, and both, forces, centripetal and centrifugal, are talking about an outward movement, but they're characterized quite differently. in terms of the sort of, relationship between sort of a dynamic of forces, really. And what Leibniz is doing is talking about something more about matter, materiality, so yeah, that's
No, this is a solid comment, I think. I guess that it's what you said, like, first about the kind of the historical and the sort of geographical. I think it's important to remember that planets are also in some regard historical entities, right? They are, this is one of the points that Clark and Szerszynski kind of emphasized, that sort of their planets are kind of things that have unique histories that kind of predate us. So really, I think that sort of history kind of really, in a strong way, kind of is prior to geography here. But then we're kind of brought into really geography, and sort of, or literally geography becomes the form of history, or history is given geographical form or geological form, I suppose. And I guess what's interesting for me in all of this is less the perhaps less the sort of post-Newtonian discussions, but almost like the ancient, concept of ascent here, and the way that we can think about, there's a sort of proto-conceptual implication in the last thing I said here, in the sort of the animal body, that's almost like the earth that manages to think, to make forms that are kind of against itself, and kind of that are kind of posited out of itself. So there's some a German idealist track that we're on here too, in the sense that we're like the earth literally kind of posits certain animal forms that sort of are able to kind of become individuated and then kind of populate and sort of move against it. And I think there is something here. It's also like, on this note, of course, there are some very interesting shifts that happen about in terms of thinking about space. And I will see if I can dig up the reference. I read a part of a book recently about how different types of spatial thinking happens in the just around this time after Newton too, or by Newton perhaps even, that sort of we move from where really a kind of a horizontal movement is we lose the kind of the center of the earth as our kind of reference point, right? Even in talking about what's a straight line, and sort of what when it comes to decomposing movement, and we end up with a kind of a what will be like a Cartesian coordinate system, and think about intersecting lines. Whereas previously, if you think about this a horizontal line, it's literally it's curved. Right, it's curved because it's defined against the center of the earth. And I think we're still very pre-modern here in this seminar in this way, because we're so kind of strongly centering the earth, but we're trying to think about the local center in light of a kind of a population of local centers, and conceptually where the planet is kind of the defining form of locality. It's like an aggregation of locality that sort of makes the local in a way for us. Arnab, do you also have a thought you wanted to share?
Yes, Carl, and thank you for the presentation. It was very illuminating. I've kept my camera off because my camera driver is not working with the Zoom software, actually.
Don't worry.
So sorry about that. But I was thinking of the presentation you gave, and what you stated was the things you stated were on the basis of materiality and matter, as it works through space. But I was, as my research background is a bit in the immateriality, especially in ritual studies, ritual and repetition. So I was thinking of immaterial traditions of thought that actually talk about a larger reality of the one. sorts of monism that from Parmenides to Spinoza, sorts of monism that encompass all of reality in a larger and perhaps infinite space, where the immaterialities of that are simply infinite. So I was thinking whether this kind of space also has, monistic space also has connections with the advent of soteriological thought during the exile age, and how the rise of soteriological thought and the immaterial were also a kind of ascent, as in parallel to the Promethean ascent of modernity and late modernity, that has been perhaps non-hegemonic in late modernity, but it has survived through occult and esoteric traditions, which have given it new forms, new histories, and new teleologies. So if you could talk about the importance of this, it would be very illuminating, Carl.
Yeah, I think thanks a lot for that. I think what's one of the things that's interesting, and maybe that I'm also trying to wrap my head around, is a little bit the image of ascent in different types of discourses. There is, of course, this very physical thing that I've been talking about here, but it also, as you say, kind of recurs and kind of appears in both in philosophy, but also in sort of soteriology and various mystical tradition. There is a discourse of ascent and sort of in leaving the material realm and sort of the earth behind, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And also, as you say, kind of merging with the one somehow, where there is both some kind of weird thing going on it's both an ascent, but also the one is supposed to be kind of expressing everything, and to be all encompassing and beyond all of that, which is given as some kind of explanatory principle. And I think that what will be moving towards, I think there are different ways that this could play out here. But I guess the one thing I would say that this is not something that I've kind of really settled. I think there are different ways that sort of we are both in a way going against the one, if the one is sort of some sort of operationalized as an explanatory principle. Okay, maybe that is the earth then in sort of the world, and this is already a sort of a way of doing a lot of violence to this type of thinking, where there is where we kind of literally materialize and delimit a principle as a sort of a historical entity. But there is also perhaps something that we can reach in the future, like in a very material sense. I mean, there's the Teilhard de Chardin who has this idea of the omega point, right, where the earth becomes like the noosphere is completed and becomes this like really end of history. And in the last session we'll be talking a little bit about the cosmists like Fyodorov, who has the idea of a universal resurrection of everyone that has ever lived, which is a very Christian idea in the sense that that's literally the body is meant to be returned, but he does it through kind of a going out into space and kind of really kind of so that we can reach everywhere. So I think there will be these kind of various physicalized versions of these traditions. But of course, all of this draws on the ultimately the analogy and the sort of the allegory of ascent, of the idea that sort of we can reach a different realm of consciousness or existence or experience, or the soul, or that we can access something different based on kind of rising higher. And this in itself is very interesting, because I mean, maybe we can even imagine that there's a way in which the idea of the highest good has some kind of we can at least play with the idea that it has some kind of physiological origin in our relationship to the sun and so on. But this is also something that is historical, that we've been able to kind of literally rise from the dark depths of the sea to sort of to a place where there is an abundance of light that we can tell has a very distinctive origin point. So I guess we're kind of on some journey of a very extreme form of environmental determinism here. I'm not sure if that helps with the...
Yes, it does, Carl. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so Sensa, and then afterwards we go into some presentations, I think, if that's okay.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I will turn up my sound volume a little bit. There we go.
Just a couple of notes based upon things mentioned and a pretty punctual question. First of all, I love that you came up in the beginning with how does one think in the relation between agency, human bodies, and the planet inhabited, that is Earth, from going to the gym, from lifting weights, because it does make sense. Like it took me to thinking about what you said later on. When I think that I act natural, do I do it based upon which instincts, on what or a trend that I partake in, or rather on something more pristine, more fundamental? And that's, for example, a narrative which the fitness industry carries when hijacking the idea of fitness, even of adaptability, of kinship potential among species, onto a single unit of trends to partake in, which is lifting fucking weights or eating good. Following that, I also thought about this idea of planetary paradigms. For example, following Copernicus, the whole idea of Copernican revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, and how the switch between paradigms, even at the most conceptual level, don't really do shit with the material structures held in such paradigms, which are changing. For example, nothing happened with the imperial structure held in the political structures of early Renaissance from the change of geocentric to heliocentric. It didn't happen. And I also thought about something that was mentioned here earlier, about the difference between scales on the concepts brought up so far, and how they do seem a little bit limp. For example, since from the notion of planetarity has a reference to an organization of elements, and the consequences of such organization might as well be the definition of animals. So I do think that there is some equivocations between the scales that we're trying to discuss. Taking all of these notes that I've brought up, my question is, does the question for planetarity effectively determines the trajectory of animality and animal agency, or doesn't it? And if not, then what does?
Simple answer is probably to some extent. The more complicated answer is that I think it's very difficult to determine exactly to what extent, because we would have to. There are so many things that we're. I think that's a very difficult question to answer, just in terms of because everything is so incredibly overdetermined, and what we can do instead of trying to come up with an answer for this is to try to tell some kind of interesting story, where we're going to have to kind of isolate some causal variables in order to kind of build a narrative. And I think really this is the task of at least of geographical thought, but maybe also some philosophical ambition of geographical thought, to find really sort of what kinds of spatial influences on our lives or have perhaps contributed to making us who we are, and also to use this as a way to kind of cultivate some kind of self-understanding, right? And I think this really wraps back to the kind of the everyday observation that you mentioned, that sort of, you know, maybe we're trying to invent some kind of competing paradigm to the fitness industry, and to kind of to think about human movement from a different perspective. I was talking to a couple of physiotherapists about this stuff, and they seemed quite interesting. But I think there's some ways in which we can try to extend our everyday lives just conceptually, to link it to the terrestrial backdrop and history that we are partaking of. And what might this do? I guess we're about to find out is the simple answer. And but I do think that it can sort of really have some sort of influence on sort of just how we think about ourselves and our everyday lives in almost a therapeutic manner. I was going to say something else, but I completely lost it. I will probably come back soon. Sorry about that. In the meantime, I will just respond to the question from Daniel in the chat. Unfortunately, I cannot unmute my microphone at the moment, but I have a question about the different registers of history that seem to be at work here. The social human and the geological astrophysical. Are we just accepting a flattening or equivocation of these separate conceptions of history? Again, simple answer. I think in some way, yes. I guess we're trying to force them together or to have them as different measures that we can jump between in different ways. The way that, and this is maybe why fixing spatial scales in a way and to focusing on a particular kind of relationship helps us explore this through different temporal conceptions of history, so that we can look at different lengths of time and sort of changes that happen on them. But of course, we can also choose to dig down and sort of explore any one of these in more detail. And this is what we're going to do in the next few sessions. It's just that I think it's very important that we keep in mind that they are also related to each other, so that when we talk about weightlifting, for instance, we will also be remembering that it has some kind of relevance to this very much longer kind of ecological and sort of anti-planetary trend that we're tracing in terms of hundreds of millions of years rather than maybe just a few minutes or seconds. So this is really the point of it. So of course we want to always kind of isolate some sort of temporal duration, but also we want to keep in mind that there are many different durations that are of the same kind of vertical motion ongoing. Thanks for these questions. I think they're very useful also to clarify things. So we have about half an hour. I would like for everyone to just very briefly kind of introduce themselves and sort of how you ended up here, if that's okay. From experience, I know that there's a phenomenon that I will term now introduction inflation, where it's sort of every person says a little bit more than the person before them, and let's try to yes, you know it. Let's try to avoid that. I really kind of want to get to know you, but just in the interest of time, like if you say a couple of sentences about where you're from, and we can discuss more in the coming sessions, but just so everyone gets a chance to just say hello. So I'm gonna go left to right in my screen, starting with Niamh.
Hi, my name is Niamh. I am based in Ireland. I'm registered here at the Research Centre on the Philosophy Critical Theory program. And I'm into my second year. I'm an artist, a researcher, and a curator. And I did a PhD on Leibniz's art of combinations and Deleuze's diagram. And I've been ever since doing that, trying to discover what exactly I was trying to do with it. So I really was trying to look at Deleuze's differential trying to sort of see what, the reading of Leibniz could bring that was sort of different to how Deleuze reads Kant in terms of the differential, and then also in relation to Hegel, who and this idea of scale. The scalar kind of question really comes up in Leibniz's art of combinations, but it's about the infinitesimally small as opposed to, and its their disappearance, as opposed to the infinitely large in Hegel. And it's kind of, it's a whole kind of problem about computation also. And I looked at that in relation to his theory of perception and force, which is why I was kind of talking about force earlier on. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you. Really looking forward to the seminar. It's been great so far.
Thank you. And then I have Senza.
Yes. Hello. My name is Sensa. I'm from Ecuador in South America. I'm into perfumes and war and religion and weightlifting and bodybuilding and those things. I do shows and play music. I also studied sociology. I'm following up with the research on nonverbal outputs, as I like to call them, like the things that I just mentioned, like fragrance or war or those things. And I chose this seminar because I think it's deeply tied with that premise of nonverbalism, and because I think the title of the seminar was sick. And yes, that's it.
Thank you. And then I have Arnab.
Hello, everyone. I'm Arnab from Kolkata in India, and I have a background in English studies from Jadavpur University in the same city as I live in. Then I had a gap in my academics through stint in the private sector, but after that I returned to academics, have completed some coursework, and am presently completing my second master's in theology from GCS, the Global Center for Advanced Studies, and also the in Transdisciplinary Studies at the New Center. My research interest is largely in ritual repetition and its extrapolation onto the real world. How the transposition of the immaterial or energies in the scientific sense takes place, be it the immaterial psychic energy or the energies of matter. And I took this seminar and the one that you offered earlier, Carl, mainly due to the entanglement of history and geography, social and scientific history, because that is also important to my work, and especially the entanglement of various scales of history and geography. That will be important because it's not that only I'm focusing on a particular aspect of like a ritual in a particular religion, but ritual and repetition as a way of being, as it structures our lives and also is somehow built into the larger natural order to a certain extent, with differentials and contingencies, but still some repetition has been built into the natural order. So that's my humble 2 cents. So thank you.
Thank you. Daria?
Hi, my name is Daria. I'm from Ukraine originally, but I'm based between Kyiv and Berlin. I'm art curator and art historian, so glad that we have colleagues. Yeah, that I have colleagues here also to share and exchange. Well, basically, my current research is on the new psychic conditions, and I'm interested in all this like ecological turn in modern human, especially it is important for Ukrainian art, since I see how artists develop this strong connection to the earth in their practice. But I really would like to know more what we, the human beings, like fighting against or 4. Therefore, for me, your seminar, yes, sounds very exciting. And although it's a little bit difficult now to navigate with astrophysics for me, but I do already feel interesting thoughts, especially about this, this thought about the escaping. And I see the parallel that in art, we want to transcend, actually, this transcendence. This is what moves us so much. So yeah, I would really try to connect this knowledge from your seminar with art and contemporary theory. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just in general, because now that you mention it, I think it's like if we can also, I mean, the ideal situation, I think, is if everyone sort of comes up with something that's sort of a way that this is useful for them in their own practice or something. I mean, this will make me really happy. It's even if the sort of the core narrative is what it is and is interesting in its own right. I mean, if we can also find some kind of methodological or sort of impact of the ideal outcome.
Hola, bienvenidas. Bien, gracias. Adelante. Venga, Rey.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Hola, ¿cómo están? ¿Me recuerdan los nombres por sí?
Melissa?
Ay, un momentico. Al final cuadramos mejor. Bueno. Listo.
I'm not sure if Melissa is here, but if
Hello?
hello, you're
Hi,
turning your
I'm
microphone
here.
off, so I might as well jump to you next.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. My name is Melissa. I have a background in medical physics and renewable energy. I have been running a cultural center in Medellin, Colombia for the past 10 years. My current interests are in animality and the meaning of intelligence and humanity. This is what the cultural center has been doing research in recently, and this is why I took the course.
Thank you. That'll work. And then let me move on to Peggy.
Hi. So I teach in an art and design department, and I teach in design. Why did I decide to go to the new center? I really wanted to do something about art creation because I really am not an artist. Most of my degrees are actually in literature, and my final PhD is in communication and media. Somehow I've ended up back in doing a lot of philosophy rather than anything about art, but I believe we're going to be moved out of the art department, so I'm going to be back in journalism and communication, so all of that is great. I was really, I live in Connecticut in the United States. Needless to say, I'm sort of in a state of shock about our condition. I'll just leave it at that. And the idea that we could maybe put something besides the human in the center of our world would really be of interest to me. So when I was doing the readings, I actually thought that I could see some pathways this way. I love the idea of poor Jupiter being demoted, from a planet to a black hole. So I'm really very open as to what I'm going to do with this course. I'll find a pathway though.
Perfect. Thank you. Then I have Carlos.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Carlos. I'm formerly trained as an artist. I'm based between Berlin and Spain, Mallorca, currently more based in Mallorca, and I'm mainly doing currently research on coastal ecologies, or in broader terms, tourism somehow. And in regards on why I decided to join this your seminar was because I'm a close reader on Bataille, more precisely on a book from 1920s called The Solar Anus, and I was just very curious to how could I relate, I guess, solar expenditure, expenditure into planetary terms, and then lastly, why I'm choosing as well the seminar is to hopefully learn some methodological frameworks into just my practice. So
thanks for that. I will follow up on the Bataille thing. And then I have Jula. Or, sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Right, Shula, like Shula.
Jula.
So I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. So also South America. I studied industrial design, but right now I'm really interested in speculative and future design. So this is like my first ever seminar at the new center. I'm enrolled in the history, design, and world making program. And yeah, I'm eager to dive deeper. Like this is the first time that I'm at this level of education. So I'm consuming like a lot of texts that and authors that I've never like that I wasn't familiar before. So it's kind of heavy and difficult, but it's also like I feel how my brain is opening, you know, it feels physical. So yeah, I'm super motivated and wanting to know more.
Great, and thank you for choosing this one as the first. And then I have Reda.
Hello everyone, hello Carl. My name is Reda. I'm based in Morocco, Marrakesh, and I'm a certificate student in TNC, taking the critical philosophy program. I joined this seminar to continue what you started in the geographer seminar, so I wanted to see it now in the larger scale of the planetary. So I'm trying to see how we can like try to write something from it from the Sufi perspective and the Neoplatonic. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. And then Connor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Connor. I joined the seminar because this framework of anti-planetary helped me unite two like disparate interests in research, ongoing research that I've been doing. One being looking into roller coasters. I've been kind of trying to theorize and think about the roller coaster as a sort of transductive interface, a technical practice that sort of renders forces legible in the human body. And clearly the roller coaster has a lot to do with this sort of like escape from the gravity of the earth and also using that as the very engine for the generation of sensation. So that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, my other ongoing research is into cheerleading, competitive cheerleading. I was a competitive gymnast for my whole life, or most of my life, and then became a cheerleader. And I'm doing some ongoing research into, kind of looking into technique in cheerleading and the coordination of bodies as a sort of technological practice. And I'm interested in thinking through that, the way that bodies stack and build upon each other also as a way of thinking through this anti-planetary as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Jordan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan. I'm an artist based in New York. Just started in the Transdisciplinary certificate program. And my research interests generally revolve around technology, like the formation and fragmentation of identity in relation to technology and the relationships we form to and around technology. And I was particularly interested in this course because one of the like recent sustaining interests of my practice has revolved around like the transition from terrestrial to aquatic or aquatic to terrestrial, specifically through the lens of like aquatic space in relation to like virtual space. But I'm really interested in these moments of transition of or physical transformation and like spiritual transcendence that kind of relates to the ways we navigate both virtual and physical space.
Super interesting. Thank you. And then Libby.
Hi, my name is Libby. I'm an artist based in London. I am also a certificate student, although I'm in my second year and I took last year off to do my MA in painting at the RCA. Yeah, my interests, well, I'm also a yoga teacher, and I think a lot about that as a practice and sort of the expanded sensations and like towards the mechanical and the structural elements of the body. And yeah, I was excited to hear some of these thoughts today because that helped me articulate more these sorts of relationships to the practice. But in general, I'm also really interested in imaginations of the planet. I've been looking at the work of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and the noosphere, and definitely interested in this sort of technical spiritualist imagination of the planet and the future of the planet. And I've also done some research and writing recently on like Pacific navigation, as I'm originally from Hawaii. But yeah, generally a lot of interest around the body and the machinic and the organic. So excited to see how to weave those interests together in a new way.
Awesome. Thank you. Then I have Marco next.
Hi, I'm Marco. I'm based in Belgrade, Serbia. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm an architecture theorist, doing a PhD here at the University of Belgrade, School of Architecture. I'm exploring the discourse of plasticity in modern architecture, so I'm really engaged in environmental discourse, and I thought, and also the theme of planetarity, and that's why I chose the seminar. And I cannot articulate the way I think it relates to my research at the moment, but I really think it will be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Adriana is next.
Hi, I'm Adriana. I'm based in Mexico City. I'm an art curator, and I have a curatorial platform that since 2 years ago we have different contemporary art projects around the Anthropocene as the main idea, and from there we research and investigate and explore and propose lines of how contemporary art, or art practices as I like to call them, can have an agency on this planetary thought. And well, that's the interest that I'm here. I'm very excited to hear that something that you said as around ecology, because the first thought that I had is like, okay, we're working around the idea of ecology and how the interrelation or interspecies work. But recently, the last 2 projects of this year that I've developed with some different artists go around the geology. And since I'm not a scientific, it was very interesting to actually realize that the organization and the way of conceiving a human relationship within a planet, time, space, and also like the organization, chemical organization, physical organization of different elements. In a way, it dialogues with how we organize or articulate our relationships in a human world. So I'm very excited to find those relationships. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Then next I have Sahesh. If Sahesh is here. In that case, I have Ranga next.
Yeah, can you hear me, Con? Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Okay, my name is Ranga. I'm from Indonesia. Now I'm as a student for my PhD degree in geography and earth sciences. Actually, I am a lecturer in Indonesia as a
Sorry, you're cutting off a little bit. Or is that me?
And now my research is connection. So I would like to examine between the idea of the Earth in the perspective of geography and also earth sciences, and trying to comparing between the idea of the worlds, because of several philosophers always talking about the worlds in the between the continental and also analytical philosopher. So yeah, I guess the reason why that I do for your course, because I also applying in a critical philosophy certificate. So I think your idea, it is really makes me opening of eye that that is maybe possible can also support for my research talking about the Anthropocene oriented on the philosophy. Thank you, Kar.
Thank you so much. Next, I have, first of all, is it possible to get, I think Sahish connection disappeared. I think if it's possible to re-invite him into the room, and I will jump to Sarah in the meantime. Oh, sorry. So yeah, everyone has access to the chat. And then I think I only have, wait, is there anyone left? Janscher, who's also our moderator. I think if you would like to introduce yourself, that would be grand.
Yeah, hi. I'm Janscher Umar. I am from India. I have a master's in arts and aesthetics, which is basically an interdisciplinary program in visual studies, performance and theater studies, and cinema studies. I am currently a certificate student in critical philosophy. I also have a background in mechanical engineering. I was a trained motorcycle technician, and yeah, the reason why I am interested in this course is also mainly to do with my mechanical engineering background. I'm interested in the question of mechanism and mechanical experience, and how, I mean, the pitting both against conceptual strategy and conceptual behavior. So yeah.
Thank you. Is it possible to invite Sahish back if he wanted to introduce himself? Because I think he doesn't have a participation link, or the one that, yeah. Also, if there's anyone else in the attendee room that wants to say hi, that's also grand. Okay, Sahish, I think you're back. Oh, you don't have a your microphone doesn't work? Okay. Okay. So okay, so Sahish will introduce himself at another time. We're good friends, so I'm not being rude, I hope. In any case, we have a couple of minutes left before we have to wrap up. I would just like to go through a couple of administrative things about the seminar while we have time, and then we can go about our Saturday. So for next week, essentially, I think I've assigned 3 readings. 2 of them are about the aquatic to land transition in what would become tetrapods. So how fish became four-legged animals. And the third one is it's JBS Haldane's On Being the Right Size. I think it would be really good if you could read the Haldane text, because I think it's quite useful and telling also to illustrate some of the concepts I talked about today. It also leads to he has some weird sociological conclusions at the end, so which we don't necessarily want to agree with, but maybe it's interesting for other reasons for people. So it's an interesting text and very short. The other texts are more about a case study that I would like to talk about a fair bit next time, to sort of some of the constraints that are involved in sort of actually moving from one type of environment into another one. And I mentioned, and one of them focuses specifically on the problem of trying to actually swallow food. But we can also think of other similar issues. I mean, if you prefer and if you have a special interest, it's perfectly okay to read those two texts. But if you have a special interest, I mean, feel free to read something else that's related to the aquatic terrestrial transition in whether it be kind of, or even another environmental transition from land to air, or a different group of animals, so like the arthropods, like insects, or maybe the mechanics of locomotion or something like this. Not something I'm telling you to do, but feel free to. Then there's the opportunity also to, if you're taking the course for credits with the new center, there's the opportunity to do a presentation, which should be like up to 10 minutes, I think, either alone or in groups of maybe 2 people. There are basically we'll have a little bit of room within each session for presentations. But if you don't want to present for everyone, or everyone wants to present the same day or something, it's also possible to send them on to me, and I will kind of review them. The point of the presentation is basically to talk about one of the readings that's been assigned for the course, and to kind of summarize it or maybe talk about something that you found interesting, then present it and summarize it. If you've read something else that you find interesting also about the same topic that you find relevant, feel free to present on that too. I think like the most important thing is to kind of encourage some kind of contribution. And so there will be a kind of a list where you can sign up to do a presentation and so on, which should be circulated later today or maybe tomorrow. Aside from that, there will be an opportunity for a kind of an end of seminar paper or something. Basically, sorry, I'm just going to address the comments in the chat. That's weird that the drive folder is empty, because I wonder if you have the right one, because let me look into that. But let's make sure that everyone has access to the texts, because it's obviously kind of essential. In any case, there will be a end of seminar submission where essentially if you have the chance to submit like 2,000 to 3,000 words on a topic that is related to the seminar and interesting for you, and I will give feedback on it. I'm happy to, if you send sort of creative and kind of non-text formats as well. And also unfinished experiments are also really cool to submit. I'm not grading anything in terms of quality. I think like the one criteria, in my opinion, is that it's something that you found useful. So if you submit something and you decided that you found this a useful topic to write about, then you've passed the assignment. And I will give written feedback to the best of my ability. So just keep in mind that sort of I'm not an expert on every topic, and if you're writing on something that's kind of or maybe using a different medium than text, maybe I will not be able to give us good comments. But yeah. I'm happy to consult via email, and the presentation topics can be nice prototypes for this kind of thing. Do you have any questions about this? Yes, Melissa, sorry.
Hi, I was wondering if it's okay to write a work of fiction as the final assignment.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very, very simple answer. I think submit something that's, reasonable for me to read, considering that there are 20 people, and that it's useful for you, and that's it. Those are the instructions. I think because it's really nice also for me to sort of see what people are doing with this kind of content and sort of how you're transforming it into your own practices. And I think Reda linked the link to the drive, but I will also send an email after this seminar to everyone so that we should have it, since some people signed up a little, because I sent an email and then some people, I think, signed up to the course afterwards. Yes, I think that is basically it for this time. For me, and if there are no further questions, I'll see all of you in a week. It's super nice to have you all here. It's
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a nice
you.
week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Nice
you.
to be here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Carl.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.